Imagine this. You're alone, the house is silent, and the only sound is the soft hum of your own heartbeat. But then you hear it. A faint rustling outside your window. A shadow flickers across the wall. Your breath catches and your mind races with one terrifying thought: someone's outside. You tell yourself it's nothing, maybe the wind or just your imagination playing tricks. But deep down, you know you're not alone. Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, where fear isn't just a feeling. It's a reality waiting to claw its way into your life. Stay close, because tonight, you'll hear stories that will make you question whether the darkness you see is truly empty or if something is waiting there for you. Don't blink, and whatever you do, don't go looking out that window. Hit subscribe because what lies ahead is darker than you can imagine. Part 1. The Pizza Delivery. It was a quiet evening in a peaceful, unassuming neighborhood. The kind of place where you never felt the need to look over your shoulder. The streets were always calm, the air always crisp, and the only noise came from children playing or the occasional car passing by. The houses were spaced out just enough to feel private, but close enough to keep that sense of community intact. That night, I was 12 years old, home alone for the first time. My parents had trusted me enough to leave me behind while they went out for the evening. My older sister wasn't home, so it was just me, the house, and the promise of an evening filled with video games and pizza. It felt like freedom, the kind you only get when you're young and living in a safe, quiet town. The pizza was the highlight of the evening. Johnny's Pizza, a small, local pizzeria just a few blocks away, was one of our family's favorites. My mom had left me $20, along with a note to make sure I tipped the delivery driver well. 3 slices of pizza and a video game marathon were all that stood between me and the perfect night alone. The pizza would be here any minute and I couldn't wait. I was lost in my game, Nightfire, playing for the 3rd time when I heard the faint sound of the doorbell ringing. I jumped up, paused the game, and rushed downstairs, feeling the anticipation rise. The $20 bill clutched in my hand was all I needed to get my prize. As I swung open the door, I was greeted by a man who looked to be in his mid-30s. He had a rough look about him, a long, scruffy beard that seemed unkempt, glasses that sat low on his nose, and a trucker's hat perched atop his head. The pizza box in his hand was a bit greasy at the edges, but I didn't think much of it. I handed him the $20 and waited for the change. His eyes, however, weren't focused on the money. As he counted out the bills, I noticed his gaze slowly drift to my side, then past me, as if scanning the interior of the house. A strange sensation crept over me as he looked around. "You alone here?" he asked, his voice low and almost unnervingly casual. I froze for a split second, trying to process his question. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my stomach churned. I knew that my parents had taught me to be cautious around strangers, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. So I muttered the first thing that came to mind. "My parents are on their way home," I said, trying to sound confident. He gave a slow, almost too deliberate nod and handed me the change. The box of pizza felt heavier than usual as I took it, feeling the odd weight of his lingering gaze. I closed the door quickly, dismissing the uneasy feeling in my gut. It was just a delivery, I told myself. He was just a guy doing his job. But as I walked back into the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He had looked at the house a little too intently, his question lingered in my mind. But I tried to push it away. The pizza was still hot, and it was time to enjoy the night. I ate 3 slices of pizza, savoring the cheesy goodness as I retreated back upstairs to my bedroom. The game was calling me, and it was easy to get lost in the action, forgetting about the strange encounter at the door. But as the hours passed, Something unsettling began to grow inside me. I couldn't quite explain it, but the house seemed quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that was too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Around 11:00 p.m. I heard the doorbell ring again. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. This time I had no reason to expect anyone. My parents were still gone. My mind raced with questions as I hesitated for a moment. I figured it was probably a mistake, maybe a neighbor or someone who had the wrong address. But the moment my feet hit the floor, I heard it again, the doorbell, loud and insistent. I crept downstairs, careful not to make a sound, trying to look out the window for any sign of who it could be. As I approached the door, I said through the thick wood, "Mom, Dad," hoping it was just them coming home. But it wasn't their voices that answered. Instead, I heard a man's voice, deep and heavy, saying, "Hey, I need help." Confused, I asked, "Who is it?" "Just need to use your phone," he replied. Something about the way he said it sent a chill running down my spine. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, my hand instinctively reaching for the phone in my pocket. I told myself to stay calm, but the unease was quickly turning into fear. I stepped back from the door and slowly made my way upstairs, trying not to make a sound. It was then that I heard it, a faint knock at the door followed by a soft voice saying, "Please, I need help." I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no way I was opening that door. The man had seen me. He was watching me through the glass, waiting for me to make a move. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in my parents' bedroom, trembling as I sat on the bed, still holding the phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed my mom's number, but the moment she picked up, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was different, sharp, suddenly sober, as she quickly assessed the situation. I explained the details, feeling my heart racing as she asked me questions. "Did you open the door?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "No," I whispered, "but the guy, he asked if I was alone." The connection between the pizza delivery and this stranger started to form in my mind, and I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that something terrible was happening. I heard the faint sound of footsteps from downstairs, a slow, deliberate movement like someone was searching through the house. My stomach twisted with fear as I whispered to my mom, "I think he's inside." Her response was immediate, almost frantic. "Stay put. We're calling the police." I stayed in the dark, trying to stay as silent as possible, my eyes glued to the door. The fear gnawed at me, consuming every ounce of my courage as I waited for the police to arrive. Every sound felt magnified, each creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. The doorbell rang again, but this time it was no longer a question. It was a demand. And in that moment, I knew that my night had turned into a living nightmare. Part 2. The tapping. The police had promised they were on their way, but every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. I stayed in my parents' room, clutching the phone, trying to control my breathing. I couldn't stop my mind from spiraling. Every sound from downstairs made my heart race faster, and the thought of that stranger being inside the house, so close, had my body on high alert. The quiet, peaceful town that had always felt so safe was now a distant memory. I was trapped in a nightmare, alone in the dark with nothing but a flimsy bedroom door between me and whatever was creeping around downstairs. Minutes passed, maybe hours. It felt like time had stopped altogether. The only sound that filled the silence was the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and my shaky breaths. I listened intently, trying to catch any noise that might give me a clue about what was happening in the house. And then it came. The sound that made my blood run cold. At first, I thought it was just my nerves playing tricks on me, but then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. It was a light, methodical tapping, like someone was deliberately pressing their fingers against the glass. I could hear it coming from the window of the room directly below mine, the window that faced the backyard. The tapping continued. Tap, 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 tap. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as if it was trying to claw its way out. I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe. The sound was so slow, so deliberate that it sent chills racing up my spine. I felt like I was suffocating. Each tap felt louder, more insistent. The longer it went on, the more it felt like the man was trying to get my attention, taunting me. I could picture it in my mind. The figure standing outside in the dark, his face pressed up against the glass, grinning that horrible grin. His fingers with their long nails tapping rhythmically as though testing me, seeing how much longer I could stand it. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't safe. The door, the locks, none of it mattered. If he wanted in, he would get in. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the terror that had taken hold of me. Suddenly, there was a loud crash downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps. They were coming up the stairs. I felt my body go numb, my blood freezing. My hands gripped the phone harder, knuckles white, as I whispered into the receiver, trying to be as quiet as possible. "He's in the house," I whispered, my voice shaking. My mom's voice came through the phone, frantic now. "Don't move. Stay in the room. We're on our way, just stay there." But I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't feel like I was in the room anymore. I felt like I was part of something far worse, something that had already seen me. It knew I was here, and now it was coming for me. The footsteps grew louder. They were right outside the door. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a knock this time. It was like a gentle knock against the wood, a whisper of sound, almost as if the intruder knew I was listening, waiting, frozen in fear. The door handle rattled once. A slow, deliberate turn, followed by more tapping. It was like the person outside was waiting for me to respond, to show myself. My pulse was erratic, my whole body tense as if I was about to burst into flames. I knew I couldn't move, not without making a sound. The slightest noise could make it worse. I had to stay quiet, I had to stay still. But then it stopped. The tapping ceased. The footsteps paused. For a moment there was nothing but silence. It felt like the whole world had gone dead, like I was in a vacuum of dread, unable to escape. I could hear my own breath, shallow and quick, in the stillness. My heart felt like it was pounding in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then, just as I thought I might finally get a moment to breathe, the door handle rattled again. This time, it twisted with force, as if the person on the other side was testing the lock, trying to find any way in. I gasped. My hand shot out to press against the lock, holding it down. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, spinning faster and faster. I wanted to scream for help, but the only sound that came out was a stifled sob. The door wasn't just shaking now. It was being pushed against, as if someone was trying to force their way inside. I pressed harder against the lock, praying that it would hold, that I wouldn't have to face whatever was on the other side. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel the weight of it, the presence pressing against the door, suffocating me in my own panic. And then, without warning, the rattling stopped. The silence was deafening. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps to retreat, but it didn't come. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I couldn't tell anymore. My body was shaking so violently that it felt like I might pass out. The phone in my hand was slick with sweat, and my vision was blurry from the tears I'd been holding back. But still, I didn't dare move. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A whisper. A voice, soft and steady, like it was coming from just behind the door. "You're not alone," it said. "I'm right here." I froze. My mind spun, trying to make sense of the words, trying to convince myself that it was just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone. The man, or whatever he was still here. He was watching me. And I had no idea how long he had been there. The only thing I knew was that I wasn't safe, and I wasn't sure I ever would be again. The door creaked. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it was enough. The tension in the room became unbearable, and I knew, deep in my gut, that something far worse was about to happen. And then I heard it. A slow, steady knock on the door, just like before. But this time I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. The police were coming, but I knew they were too far away, too late. Whatever was out there watching me was already inside, and the nightmare was just beginning. Part 3. The Man in the Shadows. My entire body was frozen in place. Every muscle screamed at me to run, to escape, to do something, anything. But I couldn't move. It was like the fear had completely paralyzed me, binding me to the bed, my fingers still gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. The knocking stopped, but the silence was worse. It was thick and suffocating, like the air in the room had turned to lead, pressing down on me. I could feel it in my chest, the overwhelming weight of dread. Every second felt like it stretched into infinity. My mind raced, flashing through every worst-case scenario. What if the man was still out there? What if he was already in the house? What if he was coming for me? I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat, as though the fear had grabbed them and choked them back down. My breath was ragged, shallow, as I stared at the door, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. Then out of nowhere I heard it, a faint creaking, the sound of wood bending under weight. I held my breath, straining my ears. It was coming from the hallway, heavy, deliberate footsteps, slow, methodical. Someone was moving, someone was inside my house. The door handle rattled again, this time with more force. I flinched, my heart jumping into my throat. The man was trying to get in. He was coming closer. I whispered into the phone, barely audible. "Mom, he's in the house." The voice on the other end of the line was panicked, desperate. "Stay in the room. Don't open the door. Just stay quiet, honey. The police are on their way. Stay as calm as you can." But it was so hard to stay calm. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything, to protect myself. The sound of the man's footsteps grew louder, and with each step the air seemed to grow colder, thicker. I could feel the shadows closing in around me. He was getting closer. The footsteps stopped in front of the bedroom door. I held my breath, my pulse racing. There was no sound, just the heavy silence that seemed to swallow everything. Then I heard something worse, the scraping of metal. It was quiet at first, but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate drag of something across the floor. The man was dragging something, maybe a knife, maybe something worse. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The shadows outside the door seemed to stretch, creeping along the walls like dark fingers reaching for me. I wanted to shout, to beg for help, but the fear had me locked in place. If I moved, if I made a sound, would he hear me? Would he come in? And then I heard it. A low, guttural whisper from the other side of the door, a voice that made my blood run cold. "I know you're in there." The words sent a wave of terror through my body. He knew. He knew exactly where I was. My heart pounded against my ribs like it might explode. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. I whispered into the phone, "Mom, he's right outside. I think he's waiting for me." Her voice, normally calm and reassuring, was now tight with fear. "Don't open the door. Don't make a sound. The police are almost there. Just stay still. I love you. Please stay safe." But I couldn't focus on her words. I couldn't focus on anything except the feeling of the man on the other side of the door. I could almost hear his breathing, slow and steady, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for me to do something, to make a move. The seconds dragged on like hours, and then I heard it again. The whisper. "You're all alone now, aren't you?" My blood ran cold. The man knew I was alone. He had seen me. He had seen me answer the door earlier. And now he was playing with me, toying with me like I was nothing more than prey. I heard him shuffle away from the door. My heart skipped a beat. Was he leaving? Was it over? I didn't dare move. I didn't even breathe. But then the sound of footsteps started again, louder this time, more frantic, like he was moving faster. He was still in the house. He was still here. The doorbell rang again. At first I thought I was imagining it, but no, there it was. A clear, shrill ring echoing through the house. And then another. It was as if he was daring me to answer. My mom's voice crackled in my ear, desperate, trembling. "Stay hidden. Do not answer the door. The police are minutes away, honey, just hold on." I sat on the floor, knees pulled up to my chest, clutching the phone. The fear was a vice around my chest, tightening with every breath I took. I heard the sound of the back door creaking open, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A laugh. A low, twisted laugh that sent shivers down my spine. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. It was the man. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying the fear he was creating. I heard the sound of something scraping against the floor again. Then footsteps, heavy and slow. The man was inside the house. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The only thing I could do was wait. Wait in the silence, in the dark, and hope that the police would get here before it was too late. Suddenly, the door burst open. The room flooded with light. And there, standing in the doorway, was the officer. I felt my legs give out from under me as I collapsed into his arms. I had no idea how long I had been sitting there, waiting in terror. The officer held me tightly as I trembled uncontrollably, still in shock from everything that had just happened. I barely heard the officer's voice over the ringing in my ears, his words muffled but full of urgency. "We've got him. The man you described. He's been caught." But as we stood there in the doorway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I could still hear the echoes of that laughter, still feel the lingering presence of something watching me from the darkness. Was it really over? Or had I just stepped into a much deeper nightmare? Part 4. The darkness never leaves. The relief that I should have felt when the officer held me in his arms was slowly consumed by an unease that tightened its grip around my chest. My heart was still pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts, but there was something else now. Something gnawing at the edges of my mind. The officer led me into the living room, still holding me tightly, trying to comfort me, though I could tell he had his own unease. My house felt different now. It felt wrong, as though the very walls were closing in on me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer, creeping across the floor like they were trying to escape the light. I could still hear that low, mocking laugh echoing in my mind. "You're safe now, kid. You're okay," the officer said, his voice gentle, but it didn't feel like a promise anymore. It felt like an attempt to calm me down, but I could sense the worry in his voice too. I nodded weakly, trying to keep it together, but I couldn't shake the images of what had happened. Of the man outside my door. Of his eyes wide, unblinking, staring at me like he knew me. Knew everything about me. When the other officers arrived, they took over the investigation. The man had been caught just outside the house, just as the first officer had said. They arrested him, but there was something about the way they looked at each other that bothered me. The uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't tell me much, but I knew they were concerned. I sat on the couch as the officers searched the house. They didn't find anything else. No signs of forced entry, No evidence that he had been in any of the rooms beyond the living room. It felt like nothing had happened, like the man had never been there at all. But I knew better. The man in the shadows hadn't left. They tried to reassure me. "You're safe now. He won't be able to hurt you anymore," one officer told me, but I could tell they were just as shaken as I was. They didn't know everything. They didn't hear what I heard. They didn't know the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I didn't care if they had caught him. Something inside of me told me it wasn't over. He couldn't have just disappeared. And that laugh, I couldn't get it out of my head. The officers finally left, taking the man with them, and my parents arrived soon after. They rushed inside, looking frantic, hugging me tightly, but I could barely bring myself to comfort them. I couldn't shake the images of the man's face, of his smile, of how he had been standing there so calm, so knowing. "Are you okay?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. I wanted to tell her that I was fine, that everything was back to normal, but I couldn't. The truth was I was okay. I wasn't safe. Not in my own home. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the shadows that danced across the walls. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made my skin crawl. I kept thinking I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft but deliberate, as if someone was pacing just outside my door. But when I looked, there was nothing. In the morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. A note slipped under the door. It was written in messy, slanted handwriting, and it said simply, "You can't escape me." My heart dropped into my stomach. My hands trembled as I picked it up. How could he have done this? How did he get back here? I tried to call the police, but the moment I picked up the phone, the line went dead. I couldn't get through. It was like everything was falling apart. The phone was fine the night before. My thoughts raced. Was this just a prank? Was I losing my mind? Or was the man somehow still here, still watching? My parents were still in bed when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A slow tapping, faint at first but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, my breath shallow and quick. The tapping was constant now, rhythmic, like someone was teasing me, waiting for me to respond. I peeked through the blinds, but I saw nothing. No one was out there. The yard was empty. I tried to calm myself. It had to be the wind, I thought, or maybe an animal. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But then the tapping came again. Louder this time. More urgent. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't stay in this house another minute. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside. I had to get away. I needed to get out of here before it was too late. But when I opened the front door, the air was thick with something else. Something cold. Something wrong. The silence outside felt wrong. I stepped out into the yard, looking around, but the shadows were long, creeping, as though they were watching me. Waiting. And just as I turned to head back inside, I saw it. A figure in the distance, standing by the trees, watching me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. It was him, the man in the shadows. But this time he wasn't just watching. He was smiling. His eyes locked with mine. And that sickening smile stretched wider, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white in the darkness. "You can't escape me." The words echoed in my head louder than ever before. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't look back, but the tapping didn't stop. It never stopped. And that night, as I lay in bed, I realized one terrifying truth. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, the shadows were already inside me. Watching. Waiting. Part 5. The Silent Pursuit. The days blurred together after that. I tried to carry on with my life, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, each more vivid than the last. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, even when I was awake. It was as if he had planted himself into my very thoughts, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I could never fully escape him. That same morning, after the chilling encounter in the yard, I called the police again. The officer who had taken my previous statement came over to do a follow-up, but there was something off about his demeanor. He was polite, calm, but there was a hint of discomfort in his eyes, as though he too was wondering whether this was all just some sick prank or something far darker. "Is everything okay here? I'm sure you've heard it all by now, but just let us know if you feel threatened in any way. We'll keep patrolling the area," he said, handing me his card. But his words didn't bring comfort. The shadows still felt close, too close. I tried to explain the way I felt, how the man had followed me, how he had been watching me even when I thought I was alone. But the officer dismissed it as isolated incidents, assuring me it was probably just a trespasser or a random intruder. That feeling of helplessness crept back into my bones. The next few days were eerily quiet. The house, usually filled with the hum of life and the occasional creak of the floorboards, felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there, just outside the windows. I would hear faint tapping at odd hours of the day, or the sound of footsteps creeping around the house. Every time I tried to relax, every time I tried to forget, the world around me felt like it was closing in. The silence was never truly peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, the kind that let your imagination fill in the gaps. Then one night everything changed. It was around midnight when I heard the first noise, a soft creaking sound from the stairs. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to believe it. I had locked the doors, checked the windows, made sure everything was secure. But the sound persisted. Creaking, slow, deliberate, like someone testing the weight of each step, inching closer and closer to my bedroom. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The house was dark, too dark. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for my phone, praying I could call for help, but my mind was racing. What if it was him? What if he had come back? The police had said they'd take care of it, but they hadn't. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, flooded back. The steps grew louder. I could hear the floorboards groaning under the weight. My breath quickened, my chest tightening. I didn't know what to do. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the nightstand, clutching it like a weapon. But the fear that gripped me was paralyzing. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Then it stopped. The steps ceased. I held my breath, trying to listen. I strained my ears, waiting for anything. The air was thick, suffocating. And then I heard it, a knock. Soft, almost too soft to be real, but it was there. A knock as though someone was tapping on the door, waiting for me to answer. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen in place, staring at the door, waiting. Every second felt like an eternity, and then, without warning, the doorknob turned. I gasped, holding my breath, my heart thudding in my ears. I could feel the presence just on the other side of the door. My hand tightened around the lamp, ready to defend myself, but I couldn't make a sound. My mind raced. What do I do? Should I fight? Should I hide? Should I scream? The door creaked open, just a crack. I didn't wait to see who it was. I couldn't. I bolted out of bed, running toward the window. My eyes were frantic as I scanned the yard outside, but there was nothing. No one. The silence was deafening. I turned around slowly, my heart still racing, my breath shallow. The door was still slightly ajar, as though someone had opened it just enough to make sure I knew they were there. But the man, the figure, the one who had haunted my every thought, he was gone. For a moment I stood there, unsure of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was it a dream? Had my mind finally cracked under the pressure? I turned back to the window, looking out into the night. But that's when I saw it. A shadow moved across the yard, tall and ominous, slowly creeping along the side of the house. It was him, the man in the shadows, standing still just beyond the reach of the light. The smile, the grin, the eyes staring right through me. I couldn't breathe, he was back. But this time I wasn't going to run. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and dialed the police. I didn't wait for them to pick up. I didn't wait for anything. I rushed out the back door, slamming it behind me, trying to get to the front yard. But the world around me felt like it was spinning. The trees loomed over me, their shadows twisting into grotesque shapes. The backyard felt like a labyrinth. I couldn't see clearly. I could only hear the sound of my breath, my heartbeat, the distant crunch of footsteps on gravel. And then I saw him, the figure. He was standing at the far end of the yard, waiting for me. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my mouth. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there, staring at him, his smile stretching across his face, and in that moment I realized the truth. There was no escape. The darkness was already inside me. And no matter how far I ran, it would always follow. The man in the shadows would never leave. Part 6. The haunting intensifies. My heart pounded against my chest as I stood there in the middle of the yard, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The man, the one I had feared for so long, stood still in the shadows, his eyes locked onto mine with that haunting, wide-eyed grin. It felt as though time itself had stopped, the world around me fading into a blur, leaving only him standing there, watching me like some twisted predator. Every inch of me screamed to run, to hide, to escape, but my body betrayed me, frozen in place, unable to move. The figure didn't make a sound, but his presence suffocated the air around me. I could hear my own heartbeat, deafening in the silence as I took a step backward, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, he began to move. Slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. The way he walked sent chills down my spine. He didn't seem to hurry. It was as if he enjoyed the fear in my eyes, the way my body trembled. Every step he took was another knot tightening in my stomach. I turned, desperate to flee, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. The front door. I had to make it to the front door. If I could just get inside, lock it, and barricade myself in, I would be safe. But my feet felt like they were stuck in wet cement, and the figure was closing in on me faster than I could move. I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath his feet, a sound so distinct in the quiet night that it felt like a warning, a slow, menacing countdown. I finally broke free from the paralysis and bolted toward the house, not daring to look back. The door. Just a few more steps. I reached the front door and yanked it open, slamming it behind me with all the force I could muster. My body slammed against the door, my hands scrambling to lock it to make sure no one could get in. I backed away, panting, my mind racing. I had to call the police. I had to let them know what was happening, but my phone, where was my phone? I rushed through the house, my heart racing with every step, my pulse thundering in my ears. I found my phone on the kitchen counter, quickly dialing the number for the police. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the phone. The operator answered, but before I could speak, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone knocking. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, like he was savoring each moment of terror he inflicted. My breath caught in my throat. He was at the door. But how? How did he get so close? I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stay in the house, locked in my own little cage. I needed to leave. I needed to do something. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and crept toward the front door, hoping that whatever was on the other side would just go away. Another knock. Another. He wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to leave. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door, the knife gripped tightly in my hand. My mind raced. Should I open it? Should I confront him? What if he had a weapon? What if it was too late? The fear was suffocating, thick and impenetrable. The knocking stopped. For a moment there was only silence. My heartbeat felt like it would tear through my chest. Then I heard something else. A low whisper, soft but unmistakable, just on the other side of the door. "You're not alone." My breath hitched. I could feel the cold sweat running down my back, my fingers numb around the knife. My mind screamed at me to run, to do anything to escape, but my feet refused to move. The whisper continued, slower this time, more deliberate. "I can see you." I pressed my back harder into the wall, my eyes wide with terror. I could feel him, like an oppressive presence, pushing against me from the other side. But where was he? How was he so close? The door shook slightly, as if someone had pushed against it. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for the phone again, dialing the police, my voice trembling as I explained what was happening. I begged them to hurry, to get here as fast as they could. I stayed on the line, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe, as the minutes crawled by. Then the whisper came again. Only this time it was followed by a slow, hollow laugh. "Did you think you could escape?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the sound echoed in my head. This was no longer just a man standing outside. This was something darker, something more sinister. My gut told me this was only the beginning. The police were on their way, but I knew I didn't have much time. The door was locked, but what if he had a key? What if he already had access to the house? I turned to look around, my mind spinning, trying to find a way out. My only escape was the back door, but I didn't know if I could make it there without him seeing me. I didn't know if I could make it at all. The knocking stopped and the house fell into a heavy silence. Then I heard it. A soft scrape like fingernails across glass. It was coming from the back window. I wasn't alone anymore. The house wasn't safe, and the darkness that had been haunting me for so long had finally caught up with me. I was trapped. The scraping continued, louder this time, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was trying to make sure I knew it was real. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it was only a matter of time before the door opened. Part 7. The shadows close in. I couldn't breathe. The scraping noise from the back window grew louder, more insistent, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside was testing the strength of the glass, trying to find a way in. The air inside the house felt thick, suffocating, like it had been soaked in fear, and every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, as if they, too, were afraid. I still clutched the kitchen knife, my knuckles white with the pressure. I could feel the sweat pooling at the back of my neck, my entire body trembling. What was I supposed to do? There was no safe place. The front door was locked, but he had already been at it, and the back window, the one behind me, was the only other point of entry. I couldn't run, I couldn't hide. Then the voice came again. It was so close this time, as if it was standing right next to me. "You can't hide from me." I froze, every muscle in my body stiffening. The voice didn't sound like the man outside anymore. It was deeper, more menacing, almost otherworldly. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts that collided and twisted into panic. My phone was still in my hand, but I couldn't focus enough to make another call. My only thought was the knife, the cold, sharp edge of it. Would it even matter? Was he human? Or was this something more? Another scrape, this time accompanied by a soft thud. It was as if the man, or whatever it was, had stepped back from the window, only to approach again, his presence now inside the very walls of the house. My mind couldn't process what was happening. It felt like a nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. There was no escaping this. I stepped away from the wall, my legs shaky as I crept toward the back door, my eyes glued to the dark window where I had last heard the noise. I couldn't see anything, just shadows that melted into the night, but the air was thick with tension. I knew it was there, watching, waiting. As I reached the back door, the sound came again. This time there was no doubt in my mind, it was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from inside the house. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The footsteps echoed up the stairs, then paused at the top, right outside the door to my room. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear it, soft, rhythmic, like a predator stalking its prey. I didn't move. I couldn't. I held my breath, the silence so intense it felt like I could hear every single beat of my heart. Then the footsteps stopped. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but the eerie stillness. I didn't dare to move, didn't dare to make a sound. But inside my head, every alarm was ringing. I had to do something. I had to protect myself. I bolted for the stairs, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand, my mind screaming for me to leave, but my body frozen in fear. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the door handle jolt. The man he was trying to get in. I backed into the corner of the hallway, away from the door, my mind spinning in a fog of terror. My legs were like jelly, but somehow I stayed quiet, my breath shallow. The man's voice, low, almost growling, drifted through the door. "I'm coming for you." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some random intruder anymore. It felt like something was hunting me. Something that had been watching me for days, weeks, maybe longer, and it was closing in. With a final, determined shove, the door rattled again, but the lock held. The sound of his breathing grew louder, like he was pressing his face against the door, trying to force his way through. I took a step back, clutching the knife with shaking hands. It wasn't going to be enough, I realized. Then from outside I heard it, the sound of a car. The faintest hum of an engine in the distance growing louder. The police. They had arrived. I couldn't let them know I was still here. My only hope was that they would reach me before he did. I stayed still, listening to the car approach, every second dragging on like hours. The footsteps outside the door stopped. Then, just like that, everything went quiet. I had to know if the police were close, if they had heard the car. I slowly, quietly reached for my phone, dialing 911. My hands were trembling and my mind was racing. As soon as I heard the operator's voice, I whispered urgently into the phone, "They're here. The police are here. Please, hurry." But before I could say another word, I heard it, the soft click of the door handle turning. The door opened slightly. And then, with a voice like gravel scraping across stone, he spoke. "Did you really think they could save you?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I turned, my blood running cold. The man stepped through the doorway, his shadow enveloping me. He had finally found me. Part 8. The Unseen Terror. The door swung open with a sickening creak, and there he was, the man I had feared for so long. But his presence was not the only thing that struck terror into my heart. It was the sheer magnitude of his presence. He filled the room, casting a long, twisted shadow that stretched beyond the threshold of my bedroom door. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My breath caught in my throat, and I found myself paralyzed with fear, unable to take my eyes off him. He didn't move, just stood there, the faint glow of moonlight reflecting off his wild, unkempt hair. His eyes, those wide, hollow eyes, burned into me, a look so empty and predatory that it felt like they were inside my mind, tearing apart everything I had ever known. I gripped the knife tighter, but my hands were slick with sweat, the blade almost slipping from my fingers. Every ounce of courage I had summoned seemed to evaporate the longer I stared at him. Was I dreaming? No, this was real. The slow, deliberate movements, the way he lifted his hand to his mouth and smiled, revealing yellow teeth, made it clear that he was not just an intruder. He was something far worse. He was the embodiment of something. Something dark, twisted, and incomprehensible. For a moment the room seemed to grow colder and I felt the weight of the silence press against me. He hadn't said a word, just stood there, watching, waiting. Then his lips parted. A low, guttural whisper escaped from his throat, one that sent chills racing through my entire body. "You can't hide from me anymore." His voice slithered into my ears like venom, and I felt it crawl through my veins. My heartbeat quickened, the rhythm of it pounding in my chest, drowning out everything else. The walls felt like they were closing in. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? What could I do? I thought about the phone, the one that was just inches away from me. But the fear kept me frozen, paralyzed on the spot. I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't even breathe. And then he moved. His footsteps were slow, deliberate. Each step was calculated, like a predator closing in on its prey. The soft scrape of his shoes against the floor echoed in the stillness of the room, louder than anything I had ever heard before. My mind screamed for me to run, to get away, but my legs were useless. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. I was trapped in this nightmare. This man, this thing, he was inside my house. He was right here. "You think they'll save you?" He hissed again, his voice carrying through the room like a dark wind. His eyes never left mine. There was a part of me that wanted to run, but where could I go? The room had no escape, and he was closing in. I knew it was only a matter of time before he reached me, before I was within his grasp. Suddenly, I remembered the window. The same window that had been my only escape route, if only I could make it to the back door. But it was too late. I heard a knock at the door, a loud, deafening bang followed by another. Someone was trying to get in. The noise jolted me from my frozen state, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I moved. But it wasn't enough. The man, no, the creature, he was already closer, closer than I had ever imagined. I dashed toward the window, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. I had to get out. I had to leave. But as my hand touched the latch, the door rattled again. Bam, bam, bam. It was louder this time, a heavy fist slamming against the wood. And then the door opened with a loud creak. I spun around, knife raised, ready to fight, my mind in a haze of fear and panic. And there he was, standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, his twisted smile widening as if he could smell my terror. "No one's coming for you," he said, each word dripping with malice. "You're mine now." I screamed. The next few moments were a blur of frantic motion and screams, a chaotic whirlwind of desperate movements and mind-numbing terror. The man took a step closer and I backed away, my heart racing with the knowledge that there was nowhere to go. The walls felt like they were collapsing around me, suffocating me. Then the door burst open. Two figures rushed inside. The sound of boots on the floor, shouts from the hallway, it was the police. But they were too late. I could see it in their eyes. They were too late. The man smirked and stepped back, his form vanishing into the darkness like a wisp of smoke. The officers rushed to me, but I was already too far gone, lost in the terror that gripped my soul. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if they found him. I didn't care if they saved me. The man had already won. But I would never forget his eyes. Those soulless, empty eyes that watched me, always watching, waiting. And now they knew where I lived. Part 8 continued. The unseen terror, a shiver down my spine. The police rushed into the house, and I tried to make sense of what had just happened. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and my limbs felt as if they were made of stone. The officers flanked me, their eyes scanning every corner of the room, their weapons drawn, as if prepared for something much worse. I could feel the weight of their presence, but it wasn't comforting. Nothing about this situation could comfort me anymore. The man, the creature, really, had been here and I had failed to stop him. He knew everything about me. He had seen me, watched me in my own home, and I couldn't escape that feeling. I kept my back against the cold wall, my eyes darting to the door, but it was too late. He was gone. The officers shouted orders, speaking in urgent tones, but I couldn't focus on their words. My mind was elsewhere, still lost in the terrifying vision of the man in the doorway. The shadow of his twisted grin still lingered in my thoughts. I tried to steady my breath, but the realization was setting in like a heavy fog. He's gone, but he's not really gone. One of the officers, a grizzled older man with a rough, weathered face, approached me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now but still stern. I just stared at him, not knowing how to respond. "I need you to stay calm. We're going to find this guy, okay?" I shook my head, my mind reeling. "No, you don't understand." "He's still watching me." The officer's expression faltered for just a moment. "I need you to calm down. We're going to look for him. We'll find him." Find him? How? How could they find him when they couldn't even get here in time to stop him from breaking in? The moments seemed to stretch on, the terror creeping back in as I processed what had just happened. The hallway behind me was silent now, but I could still hear the faint creaking of floorboards. The sensation of being watched was suffocating and I couldn't shake it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but where could I run to? The shadows were everywhere. Then suddenly I heard it. A noise so faint, so delicate that at first I wasn't sure it was real. A light tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window, not the front window, the one at the back. The window that overlooked the dark backyard. I froze. My eyes locked on the officers as they were distracted, still speaking to each other, their backs turned. My heart raced again. This was it. I knew what was happening. It had never stopped. It was him. The man was back. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to breathe. But I knew I had no choice. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp that was sitting on the table beside me. It wasn't much of a weapon, but I had to do something. I held it tightly in my hands, my fingers gripping it until they were numb. Slowly, I crept toward the back window, each step calculated, trying to move as silently as possible. The tapping continued. Tap, 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 closer. So close. I could hear it now, louder, sharper. I had to know if it was him. I had to see if the nightmare was really here. My mind screamed at me to stay back, to wait for the officers, but I couldn't. I had to know. With one trembling hand, I pushed back the curtain just enough to peer through the crack. I almost wished I hadn't. There he was. The man. His face was pressed up against the window just like before, his eyes wide, unblinking. His twisted grin stretched across his face, and he tapped the glass with his fingers, one by one, as if taunting me. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't breathe. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I stepped back slowly, but the floor creaked beneath me. The tapping stopped. For a moment there was silence, dead silence. I dared not make a sound. Then came the knock. Bang, bang, bang. It was louder now, a forceful thud against the door, shaking the frame. My blood turned to ice. I had to get away. I had to move. But just as I turned to run, the officers turned back toward me, eyes wide with confusion. "What's going on? Did you see something?" one of them asked. Before I could answer, the back door slammed open. A gust of wind blasted through the house, chilling the air to the bone. The officer nearest the door drew his weapon, shouting orders, but I couldn't focus on his words. I couldn't move. I just stood there frozen, my eyes fixed on the figure standing in the doorway. It was him, the man from the window. But now he was standing in the doorway, watching me, watching all of us. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a twisted silhouette against the blackness of the night. I could hear the officers shouting at him, demanding that he leave, but he didn't move. His grin only widened. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he disappeared into the darkness, vanishing like a shadow. The officers rushed toward the door, but it was too late. He was gone. The terror that had gripped me moments ago, the suffocating fear that had nearly paralyzed me, slowly began to dissipate, but only for a moment, because I knew deep down that this wasn't over. It wasn't just the man in the doorway. It was something darker, something that wasn't done with me. Part 8 continued. The unseen terror a shiver down my spine. The officers stood frozen in the doorway, weapons still drawn, their eyes scanning the dark night outside. The man had disappeared, vanished into thin air just like he had on the previous night. I stood there, trembling, my body still locked in fear, my mind racing with questions. How had he gotten inside? How was he able to disappear so quickly? I could feel the weight of the silence in the room. The air was thick with it, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The officers didn't speak immediately. They exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do. One of them, a younger officer who was still shaking, stepped forward, his voice tight with frustration. "We should have seen him. We should have caught him. This doesn't make sense." The older officer, the one with the grizzled face, remained calm, but I could hear the edge in his voice. "Stay focused. We're not done yet." I wanted to scream at them, demand that they find him, but I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, my body still trembling, my mind haunted by the image of his twisted grin and those unblinking eyes. He had been so close. He had been in the house, standing right behind me, and I hadn't even known until it was too late. "Did anyone see anything else?" the younger officer asked, his voice shaky. What was he doing in the house? I wanted to answer, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? I was frozen in place, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. I don't know, I managed to stammer. He was just there. And then he disappeared. Disappeared. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Before I could respond, the sound of something crashing to the ground echoed through the house. The officers immediately turned toward the noise, their weapons raised. I felt my heart skip a beat, my breath catching in my throat. Was he back? Had he come in again? The older officer gestured for us to stay back. "Check the other rooms." "I'll stay here." I nodded, my legs shaky as I followed the younger officer down the hallway. The sound had come from upstairs. The tension was unbearable. Every step felt like an eternity. The officer in front of me led the way, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. We reached the top of the stairs and turned down the hallway. The light flickered as we moved, casting shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The silence was deafening. Then we heard it. A soft, faint sound from one of the bedrooms. Knock. A knock at the door, but it wasn't from the outside. It was coming from inside the room. I froze. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was the same sound, the same hollow, deliberate knock that had haunted me before. The knocking that had come from the window. Knock. 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 The younger officer hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. "Is anyone in there?" He called out, his voice barely above a whisper. No answer. He pushed the door open slowly, his flashlight scanning the room, but it was empty. There was no one inside. The room was dark, silent, except for the soft thud of my own heartbeat. "What the hell?" the officer muttered, his flashlight sweeping across the room. "There's nothing here." But I knew better. I knew that something had been here. Something that was still watching us, hiding just out of sight. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered again. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavier. I could feel it, like the very walls were pressing in on me. The knock came again, louder this time. And then, without warning, the lights went out completely. Darkness. I heard the officer curse under his breath, but I couldn't see him anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, the pounding of my heart, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Thud. Thud. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they were getting closer. I could feel the presence now, something cold, something wrong, moving closer to me. It wasn't just the fear anymore. It was something else. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then I heard it. The whisper. Soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. You can't escape. The voice was low, guttural, and unmistakably inhuman. I didn't know where it was coming from, but it felt like it was inside my head, twisting my thoughts. I tried to turn, but the darkness was swallowing me whole. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything except for the whisper growing louder, more insistent. You belong to me now. The words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the man anymore. This wasn't about a human intruder. This was something far worse. Something that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. The officer, who had been standing next to me, let out a strangled gasp. "What is that?" I turned toward him, but he was gone. Vanished. He wasn't even standing next to me anymore. I was alone. I was alone in the dark. The whisper grew louder, becoming a chant, a chorus of voices, filling the empty space around me. You belong to me now. It was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, a cacophony of voices filling every inch of the room. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. The room spun, the world around me blurring. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind spiraling into madness. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, the terror, but it didn't stop. It never stopped. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it all went quiet. Dead quiet. I opened my eyes. The room was empty again. The darkness had receded, and I was standing in the middle of an empty hallway. The door to the room was wide open, but there was no sign of the officer, no sign of the man. There was nothing, just the silence, but I knew. I knew it wasn't over. It wasn't over, not by a long shot.